How's it going, everybody? So we're out in the shop with another Shop Talk Tuesday, and in this episode we are working on the 5160 Bowie. Now this was the one that was inspired by this knife right here, the Karam Bowie. Now in this episode we need to focus on getting this piece of steel to the next step, what's going to actually make it look like a knife. Right now it's a pointy object, it's a knife shaped object, but we have no bevels or anything like that on it. So we've got to focus on that. We got to get the bevels ground into this, both here and here on the top. Then we got to get pinholes drilled for where the guard is going to end up being pinned into place, plus the pinholes for where these scales are going to get pinned on. So we've got a lot of work cut out for us. This is going to be one heck of a lot of grinding. We've got so much to remove here because this is over 1/4 of an inch thick. It is probably about 3/8 of an inch. It is pretty ridiculous, and we have to remove all of that because I want to get this down to about the thickness of a dime, just under the thickness of a nickel on the edge pre-heat treat, and then we'll go ahead and finish grinding after heat treat. But we've got a lot of grinding to do to get this down to where we need to be. We got to go ahead and get our plunge line jig put on here. We're going to be working a lot on the 2x72 in this episode, and we're going to start off with our worn out 36 grit shredder belt, one that we've used a lot to set that actual center cutting edge down the blade. We're going to cut our 45s in with it, and then we're going to switch to a new 36 grit shredder belt and go ahead and grind our bevels the rest of the way. We're going to be grinding our bevels about 90% of the way in this episode, and then post heat treat we'll go ahead and finish grinding them. But we'll be talking about this in the actual, voiceover and all that, but I wanted to give you a little bit of a rundown going into this, what we have planned. So a lot of bevel grinding. Let's go ahead, let's jump into it. Let's get this ground out. So we got our plunge line jig on here. Just use some simple tools to put it on there. Allen key, 14 mil wrench. Now the cool thing about this is this plunge line jig, if you want to know how to make this, I'm going to leave a link for it in the description below, but this is all just stainless steel right here. You'll see stuff that looks like surface rust or corrosion in there. Really, that's just from the high carbon dust from grinding on bevels and all that. These are all stainless, so they don't rust or anything like that. And this is the same plunge line jig that I've had for probably about a year now. Now, it's nothing fancy, no real expensive materials or anything like that, so you can make this for pretty cheap. But I like it. It makes my life a lot easier for freehand grinding the bevels. Having something to hold on to, plus something for your edge of your platen to sit on as you're grinding and bumping into, so you know when to stop on both sides. But what we're going to start with is we need to mark the edges that we're going to be grinding with our Sharpie. You can use layout fluid if you want to do that. This is just real easy with this big old Sharpie Magnum. Now, a lot of people will also put layout fluid on the sides here. I don't tend to do that. I know roughly by where I marked this, where I want this to go up to. I'm going to grind one side where it needs to be, and then I'm going to take my calipers and I'm going to measure that, transfer that over to the other side, and then grind it up to there. So I'm not having to put a bunch of layout fluid or anything like that on there. And whenever you scribe into this forge scale from the forging process, you'll actually be able to see the mark. So it's pretty simple. But we need to go ahead, mark our edge. You can do this a bunch of different ways. Drill bit, use a set of calipers if you want to. Nothing too crazy or fancy here. know I have some people that are machinists that are tripping right now because I'm using a set of calipers to do this. But these are not expensive calipers. These are your Harbor Freight specials. Nothing fancy going on here with these. I've got expensive calipers that I would never do stuff like this with. These are purchased specifically for scribing onto stuff like this. You see we got our center line scribed to there. And we're going to do the top. So we got that. Now I've actually got a scribing tool that's being sent to me from a person on Etsy, and to make it a little bit easier to scribe these, so I won't have to use these anymore. It's going to be pretty nice. That should be here within the next couple of days. But now we need to go ahead, grind to that center line. This top one will be about a 45-degree angle that we grind it all the way there, and then we'll grind the 45 into here to set that center edge so that we can then start grinding those bevels. So now let's go over to the 2x72 and get to the grinding. So what we're going to be doing on this is coming in at an angle about 45 degrees, and we're just going to get close to our center line that we have marked here and just work it in. I'm going to be coming at an angle. Just keep it pretty consistent there. Now we're just getting this defined. We're not going to the 100% on it. Again, same thing with the bevels here. They're going to be 90%. So we're just setting that in place so that we know the center is correct, everything like that. And then we'll start grinding the main bevels here up to it. But you want to do this first because it's a lot easier to get everything centered and even from the spacing, even from here to here, without the bevels being done on here. Because once you start grinding in these bevels, it's going to start tapering this bevel down to almost non-existent. So to make sure you keep a consistent bevel, you can easily see how even that line is all the way down on these flats. So it's just something we're going to do to set it in place and make sure everything's even. So you can accomplish this by a few different ways. You can do the 2x72 like I have here. You can do this on a 1x30. You can use a file jig and hand file it. Dennis over at Tyrell Knife Works actually does it that way primarily, and he gets really good results with the file jig. I might end up trying that in the future, but for right now I'm going to go ahead and continue using the 2x72, but there is a good chance that I'll be switching to a file jig because I like the results that he gets whenever he does that and how consistent you can be. Now when it comes to this 45-degree angle that we're putting on, you don't technically have to put a 45-degree angle. A lot of us knife makers just say that because it's easier to convey, but you can do a 50-degree angle, a 35-degree angle, a 60-degree angle. Any of those are fine. You're just trying to put a pretty steep angle to get to that center line that you scribed so that that part is done and all you're doing is bringing it up the side. I'll explain that more here in just a second, but all you're trying to do is just define that center edge so that you can look straight down it and make sure it's even with the tang. Like I said, I'll explain it more as we get into this, but that's all we're trying to accomplish here is a steep angle. So what you can see here is we got our top bevel done. I went ahead and hit it on the oscillating spindle sander to kind of smooth it out a little bit. Did that off camera. But you can see here on the tip, whenever you, let me get it in focus a little bit. whenever you start grinding in the secondary bevel, or this main bevel right here, it starts erasing where this comes forward. So as you start bringing these bevels up, it's going to make this area smaller and smaller and smaller. And if we were to grind the bevels in first here and then grind this in second, you wouldn't be able to see that this is nice and even all the way down, the same space all the way down. So that's the reason why you want to do that first. And of course the whole point behind this is to create a line that is even with the spine here, so the spine comes through and flows through, and just this piece is raised up above it. But we're going to go ahead, grind in this other 45-degree angle, and then we'll start bringing the bevels up. So now that we have our bevels ground on both sides and we've established that center edge, we want to go ahead and bring these bevels up. What we're going to do is get on here, start grinding in, and what I'm going to be doing is gradually raising these bevels up by putting more and more pressure on the spine of this and slowly bringing those up as we come across. Now the whole point behind this is just making sure that we gradually come up so that we don't accidentally come in here too flat and we start grinding this area and putting grind lines in this, because it'll mess up our texture. So we want to slowly bring it up until we're done. That's why we're just going to come in at a bigger angle or a steeper angle and then slowly work our way more vertical. We're going to be doing that. We're going to be making nice even motions, being consistent with this, coming in, moving our body, and just working it in. I am going to be switching this to a new belt, and then we're going to get to grinding. Now right here, through the miracle of editing, I'm going to make this look like it only took me 2 minutes to grind in the bevels to this. And all it is just because I wanted y'all to get the highlights of the grinding in the bevels. It took me approximately, it was 3.5 hours to grind in the bevels to this, just to be consistent with it. And taking this much material off, hindsight, I should have forged in some of these bevels. It would have made my life a lot easier, so I didn't have to grind this much material off. But it is what it is. I sat here at the grinder for seriously about 3.5 hours grinding this, and it took a long time, but it was worth it in the end. And like I said, through the power of editing, it looks like I did it a lot faster than what I actually did. Now when it comes to drilling the pinholes, I went with 3/16 pins for the area where the handle is going to go. So the scales for the handle on the tang. And then I went with a 1/8 bit for the pins that are going to be pinned into the guard, so that I didn't end up putting too big of a pin in that guard area, and I didn't have to make really large holes. Even though 3/16 are not large holes, I didn't want to make large holes in that section that's going from the ricasso into the tang because I didn't want to weaken that area. So we went with 1/8 pins, and that way make sure that we're not going to have any issues in the future. Alright guys, let's go ahead and wrap this Shop Talk Tuesday up right here. Some of that. What do y'all think about how that is turning out? Love the way everything is looking on this. That hammer forged texture going into those bevels. The way that false edge looks, or the swedge looks on there. You know, one of the things that I always look for whenever I'm doing this, and I'm doing this type of top part here, a harpoon, if you want to call it that, harpoon style, I want this line where the spine is to flow straight into this section so that this piece just pops up over that. That's what I'm always going for right there. But I really like how this is turning out. It is an absolute beast. The blade itself is 9 1/4 inches long. The overall length is 15. Big old guy right there. Y'all tell me what y'all think about that. That's really awesome. But when it comes down to this and you're going through and you're grinding your bevels, you want to make sure that you're doing them in the right process. That's the reason why I did the bevels on the top first, so that I could see a nice consistent parallel line between where the flats are and the peak all the way down, because if you try to do it after the fact, you'd have this larger area here and the itty bitty area there. It's a lot harder to do and be consistent with it versus being able to see a nice parallel line all the way to the edge and then coming in and doing your bevels and grinding them up to it. Got a real nice outcome from that. One of the best parts about doing the finish that I'm doing on this is I can actually leave it at a 36 grit and then heat treat it, come back in, finish grinding it. I don't have to worry about, you know, taking this and sanding it up or anything like that going into the heat treat process. Heat treat it just how it is. I only brought the bevels to about 90–95%, so we still got to end up grinding more anyways, so it's not necessary for me to go through and do any hand sanding or anything like this pre-heat treat. But we're going to end up coming back after the heat treat and grind in the rest of the way and then put that texture on it that we want with the, you know, the 36 grit belt, and then acid etch it, do all that process to get that finish that we're looking for. But what we need to do in the next episode is go ahead and get this heat treated. That's what we're going to be focusing on, so make sure y'all come back for that. So far, we got bevels, we got our pinholes drilled for our guard, our handle, we're ready to go there. Heat treating, that's coming up, so guys, be on the lookout for that one. Thank y'all for coming by. If you would, give this video a thumbs up, share this video or one of my other videos. If you haven't yet, make sure you subscribe to the channel. Y'all have an amazing day. Y'all stay safe out there. I'll catch y'all next time. Some more of that. Ah, that is just so cool.